The children were laughing near the edge of the backyard where the perfectly manicured lawn met the towering pine trees that marked the boundary between the estate and the vast wilderness beyond, and the family dog, a powerful German shepherd named Kodiak, had been lying in the afternoon sun just moments earlier, but now he was frozen, every muscle in his body locked tight, his ears pressed forward, and a low growl began rumbling deep in his chest, a sound the children had never heard him make before. And when 8-year-old Emma turned to see what was wrong with him, she followed his gaze toward the tree line, and there, standing partially hidden in the shadow of the pines, was a wolf, not a coyote, not someone's husky that had wandered off, but an enormous grey wolf with pale yellow eyes that seemed to be calculating something as it stood absolutely still, watching, and inside the house their father Marcus was on a business call, completely unaware of what was unfolding just 200 feet from where he sat. And the wolf took one slow, deliberate step forward, testing the distance, measuring the space between itself and the children, and Kodiak immediately repositioned himself, placing his body directly between the predator and the two kids, his growl deepening into something primal. And right now you're probably wondering the same thing anyone would wonder in this moment: is this about to turn deadly? And to understand how this family ended up in a standoff with one of nature's most intelligent predators, we need to go back to earlier that same afternoon. Marcus Chen had built his fortune in technology, and 3 years ago he purchased this 200-acre estate in the mountains of Montana, just 20 miles from Glacier National Park, because he wanted his children to grow up with space and nature and the kind of freedom that his own childhood in a cramped San Francisco apartment never provided, and the property was secured with everything money could buy: reinforced fencing around the main residence area, motion sensor cameras at every access point, a gated entrance that required a code, and the confidence that comes with isolation, because out here there were no neighbors for miles, no traffic, no strangers, just wilderness and quiet and the illusion of perfect safety. And Marcus had dismissed the local news reports that had been circulating for weeks about wolf sightings closer to residential areas, explaining to his wife that wolves in America almost never approach humans, that they're naturally shy and avoid conflict, and he wasn't wrong about wolf behavior in general, but what he didn't fully understand was that this particular winter had been devastating, one of the harshest in decades, with heavy snowfall that buried prey animals and drove elk herds deeper into protected valleys where wolves couldn't easily follow, and wildlife biologists had been tracking a dispersing young male wolf, approximately 3 years old, that had been pushed out of his pack's territory and was now ranging alone through unfamiliar terrain, desperately hungry. And when predators get desperate, their calculations about risk begin to shift, and Kodiak had sensed something wrong since morning. He had been pacing near the back fence, sniffing the air, refusing to come inside when called, and when the children asked if they could play outside after lunch, Marcus said yes, because the day was beautiful and the yard was fenced and Kodiak was always with them. And he trusted the dog completely, even if he didn't fully understand what the dog had been trying to tell him all day. Emma and her younger brother Lucas had been playing their usual game of explorers, wandering toward the back of the property where the fence met the forest, and Kodiak had followed them as he always did, but his behavior was different. He wasn't playful, he wasn't relaxed, he kept stopping to stare at the tree line, and the children were too absorbed in their game to notice, and that's when the birds changed everything. A flock of juncos that had been foraging in the underbrush suddenly exploded into the sky, scattering in every direction, and Kodiak stopped moving completely, his body going rigid, his ears rotating forward, and the growl that came from him was something ancient, something bred into his DNA over thousands of years of guarding humans against exactly this kind of threat. And Emma turned because she had never heard Kodiak make that sound, and she saw him staring at the shadows beneath the pines. And when she followed his gaze, her 8-year-old mind took several seconds to process what she was seeing, because the wolf was so large, easily 120 pounds of lean muscle and winter-thickened fur, and its eyes were locked on her, not with aggression exactly, but with something worse, with assessment, with the cold patience of a predator evaluating whether the risk was worth the reward. And the wolf didn't charge, it didn't even move, it just stood there watching. And that stillness was somehow more terrifying than any snarl could have been. The wolf began to move then, not toward them, but parallel to the fence line, a slow circling movement that allowed it to test boundaries, to look for weaknesses, and Kodiak tracked every step, his body shifting to maintain his position between the predator and the children, and his growl grew deeper, more urgent. And Lucas finally looked up from the stick he had been playing with and saw the wolf, and he grabbed Emma's hand and whispered that they should call for Daddy, and Emma tried to call out, but her voice came out too quiet, too strangled by fear, and she tried again, louder this time, screaming for her father, and inside the house Marcus heard something in his daughter's voice that made his blood run cold, a pitch of terror that no parent ever wants to hear, and he dropped his phone and ran toward the back door, and when he reached the patio and looked out across the yard, his mind refused to accept what his eyes were showing him, because there was a wolf on the other side of his fence, not 100 yards away, not across a field, but right there at the boundary of his property, and his children were too close, far too close, and Kodiak was the only thing standing between them. Marcus knew enough about predators to understand that running could trigger a chase instinct, that sudden movements might escalate a situation that was currently at a standstill, and he forced himself to walk instead of sprint, calling out to the children in the calmest voice he could manage, telling them to walk toward him slowly, not to run, just walk, and Emma started pulling Lucas toward the house, their small legs moving in that careful way children move when they're trying desperately not to run, and the wolf's posture changed, its head lowered, its tail extended straight behind it, and its pale eyes tracked the movement of the children with an intensity that made Marcus feel physically sick, and Kodiak must have sensed the shift because he stepped forward aggressively, barking now, sharp explosive barks that echoed across the property, trying to draw the wolf's attention away from the retreating children, and the wolf responded with a snarl that split the afternoon silence, showing teeth that had been designed by evolution to tear through hide and crush bone, and for a moment both animals stood there, predator and protector, testing each other's resolve. What happened next was something Marcus would replay in his mind for years, because the wind had been picking up all afternoon, and there was a service gate on the east side of the fence, a gate that the groundskeeper used for equipment access, and Marcus had meant to have it properly secured but the latch was old and he kept forgetting, and when a strong gust of wind swept across the property, it pushed the gate open just a few inches. But a few inches was enough, and the wolf noticed. Immediately, its head turning toward the gap, and Marcus saw the calculation happen in real time, the predator recognizing that the barrier between itself and potential prey had just been compromised, and the wolf took 3 quick steps toward the gate and slipped through, and now it was inside the fence, inside the property, and the distance between it and the children was shrinking with every second, and Lucas started crying, his 7-year-old voice breaking as he called for his daddy, and Emma was trying to shield him, trying to keep moving toward the house, and Marcus was running now because there was no more time for caution, and Kodiak made his decision. The dog charged toward the wolf with a speed and ferocity that Marcus had never seen from him, not reckless but strategic, angling to intercept the predator before it could close the distance to the children, and Kodiak's barks were explosive now, each one a statement of territory and warning, and he didn't run straight at the wolf but moved side to side, forcing the predator to track him, to shift its focus away from the smaller, easier targets. And the wolf hesitated because this wasn't what it had expected. It had expected fear and flight, not a direct challenge, and when Kodiak got within striking distance the wolf lunged, and for a terrible moment both animals were locked together, a blur of fur and teeth and snarls, and Marcus heard sounds that didn't seem possible, the deep guttural growling, the snap of jaws, the scrabbling of claws on packed earth, and dust kicked up around them as they separated and circled, and Kodiak had a cut above his eye that was bleeding freely but he didn't retreat. He kept positioning himself between the wolf and the house where the children were now scrambling up the patio steps, and Marcus reached them and physically shoved them through the door, yelling for them to get inside and lock it, and then he turned back to see his dog facing down a predator that outweighed him by 30 pounds. Marcus remembered the emergency preparedness kit his wife had insisted they keep, and he ran toward the garage where it was stored, and his hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the air horn, but he grabbed it and sprinted back outside, and the wolf was pressing forward now, testing Kodiak's defenses, and the dog was giving ground slowly, not retreating but drawing the wolf away from the house, and Marcus could see the exhaustion in Kodiak's stance, the wounds he was accumulating. And he raised the air horn and pressed the trigger, and the sound that erupted was devastating, a blast of noise that echoed off the mountains and seemed to fill every corner of the valley, and the wolf flinched, its ears flattening against its skull, and Kodiak surged forward with renewed aggression, barking fiercely, and the combined pressure, the noise and the determined resistance and the fact that the easy prey had disappeared inside a structure, shifted something in the wolf's calculation. And the predator made its decision. It began backing away, slowly at first, maintaining eye contact with Kodiak, and then it turned and loped toward the open service gate, and it slipped through and headed back into the forest, and Kodiak didn't chase, he stood his ground, watching, ensuring the threat was truly retreating, and only when the wolf had disappeared into the shadows did the dog finally turn and limp toward Marcus. And that was when Marcus saw how much blood was matting his fur, how many places the wolf's teeth had found their mark. The wildlife officers arrived within 40 minutes, and they confirmed what Marcus had suspected, that this was a dispersing male wolf, young and alone and driven to desperation by one of the worst winters the region had seen in decades, and they explained that wolves almost never attack humans, but they also explained that children moving erratically near a forest edge, with their higher-pitched voices and smaller statures, could potentially trigger prey recognition in a desperate predator. Especially one that was starving and had been pushed out of its normal territory. And the officer who examined the tracks and the scene told Marcus something that kept him awake for weeks afterward. She said that if the children had run, if there had been no dog between them and the wolf, the chase instinct might have overwhelmed the wolf's natural caution, but Kodiak's positioning, his willingness to engage and his controlled aggression, had disrupted the predator's confidence, had made the calculation no longer worth the risk, and she said that dog saved those children's lives and she wasn't being dramatic, she was stating what the evidence suggested. And inside the house the children were wrapped in blankets despite the warmth of the fire, both of them unable to stop shaking, and Emma kept asking if Kodiak was going to be okay, and the veterinarian who had driven out to the property was cleaning the dog's wounds in the kitchen. 3 deep lacerations that required stitches and multiple puncture wounds that would heal but would leave scars, and Marcus stood there watching his dog lie still on the emergency blanket, patient and calm despite the pain, and he felt something collapse inside his chest. Earlier that day Marcus had ignored every signal Kodiak tried to give him, the pacing, the alertness, the refusal to relax, and he had dismissed it as the dog being restless, as animal anxiety that had no basis in reality, and he had been so certain in his understanding of the situation, so confident that his fences and his cameras and his isolation made his family safe, and he had forgotten that there are things in this world that fences cannot stop, that technology cannot predict, that only instinct can sense, and Kodiak had known since morning that something was wrong, had tried in the only ways a dog can try to communicate danger, and Marcus hadn't listened, and when the moment came, when the wolf slipped through their gate and the children were exposed, Kodiak hadn't hesitated for even a second, he had placed himself directly in harm's way, facing down a predator that could have killed him, and he had done it without any calculation about his own survival, without any expectation of reward, with nothing driving him except the pure instinct to protect the family he loved, and Marcus understood now what he had failed to understand before, that the dog had been guarding them all along, that every time Kodiak followed the children into the yard, every time he slept by their bedroom doors, every time he watched the tree line with those alert eyes, he was doing the job he had been born to do, the job that Marcus had never truly seen until today. That evening, after the veterinarian had left and the children had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Marcus found Kodiak resting on his bed near the fireplace, and the dog's eyes were closed but his ears still rotated at every sound, still tracking, still vigilant, and Marcus knelt down beside him and placed his hand gently on Kodiak's side, feeling the rhythm of his breathing, and his voice came out softer than he intended, almost a whisper, when he said, "I should have trusted you," and Kodiak opened his eyes and looked up at Marcus with that steady gaze that dogs have, and there was no resentment in it, no accusation, just the same loyalty that had always been there, the same quiet devotion, and the dog leaned into Marcus's hand, accepting the touch, accepting the presence, and Marcus stayed there for a long time, his hand resting on his dog's side, watching the firelight flicker across the room. And he thought about all the ways we fail to see what's right in front of us. All the warnings we dismiss, all the instincts we override with our certainty and our logic, and he thought about how sometimes bravery doesn't look like charging forward, sometimes it looks like standing absolutely still in front of something much bigger than you, refusing to move, refusing to let it pass, and he thought about how Kodiak would do it again tomorrow if he had to, and the day after that, and every day for the rest of his life. Because that's what protectors do, they don't ask permission, they don't weigh the odds, they just step forward when stepping forward is what needs to be done. And the children woke several times that night from bad dreams, and each time Kodiak was there, lying at the foot of their bed, watching the door, and Marcus understood that this dog would spend the rest of his life doing exactly what he had always done, guarding, watching, protecting, and that some debts cannot be repaid. They can only be honored by recognizing what they truly mean. And in the morning the children would come downstairs and wrap their arms around Kodiak's neck and call him their hero, and the dog would accept their love with the same calm patience he accepted everything, and Marcus would spend the next several months reinforcing every fence, securing every gate, and he would never again dismiss the warning signals his dog tried to give him, because he had learned something that he hoped he would never forget. That wild instinct recognizes danger long before comfort allows us to see it, and true protection doesn't wait for permission, it just acts, and sometimes the bravest thing in the world is a dog who refuses to move from the space between danger and the ones he loves. And if you've ever watched your dog suddenly freeze and stare at something you cannot see, maybe now you'll understand that they're guarding you from threats you didn't even know existed, and maybe that's the kind of love that's hard to put into words. The kind that doesn't need thanks, that doesn't ask for recognition, that just shows up when it matters most and stands between you and whatever darkness might be coming. Do you believe animals sense danger before we ever see it? Let me know in the comments, because I'd love to hear your stories about the moments your pets protected you, and if this story moved you, share it with someone who calls their dog their protector, because they'll understand exactly why this matters.